The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Windsor Castle, as Prince George walked quietly through the gardens. At 15, he had grown tall and thoughtful, often preferring solitude to the constant attention that followed him everywhere. Today felt different somehow, heavier with an unspoken tension that seemed to hang in the air like morning mist. George paused near the rose garden, watching as the groundskeepers went about their morning routines. Everything appeared normal on the surface, but he had learned to notice the subtle signs that others missed. The way certain staff members avoided eye contact, the hushed conversations that stopped when he approached, the unusual number of security personnel positioned around the castle grounds. Detective Inspector Sarah Manning had been assigned to his personal protection detail 3 months ago. Unlike the other guards who maintained strict professional distance, Sarah had a warmth about her that made George feel more like a normal teenager than a future king. She was in her early 30s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a quiet confidence that commanded respect from everyone around her. George had first noticed something was wrong 2 weeks earlier during a routine visit to a local school. Sarah had been scanning the crowd with unusual intensity, her hand positioned closer to her radio than normal. When he asked her about it later, she had given him a reassuring smile and said it was just standard procedure. But George had inherited his grandmother's ability to read people, and he knew Sarah was hiding something significant. The truth was far more serious than George could have imagined. Intelligence services had intercepted communications suggesting a potential threat to the young prince's safety. The details remained classified, but Sarah and her team had been working around the clock to assess and neutralize any possible danger. The threat appeared to come from within, making their job infinitely more complicated. Sarah stood in the security briefing room that morning, studying photographs and documents spread across the table. The evidence was circumstantial but concerning. Someone with access to the prince's schedule and movements had been sharing information with unknown contacts. The leak could be anyone from a staff member to someone within the security apparatus itself. "We need to be extremely careful about who we trust," said Commander Richards, the head of Royal Protection. "The prince's safety is our absolute priority, but we cannot create panic or disrupt normal operations without concrete proof." Sarah nodded, understanding the delicate balance they needed to maintain. Prince George was at a crucial age where too much restriction could damage his development and relationship with the monarchy. Yet they could not afford to take any risks with his safety. The solution would require careful planning and discretion. Meanwhile, George continued his daily routine, attending classes with his private tutors and participating in carefully scheduled public appearances. But he was becoming increasingly aware that something significant was happening behind the scenes. The staff seemed more nervous than usual, and there were faces he didn't recognize among the security personnel. During lunch that day, George decided to test his suspicions. He mentioned to several different people that he was looking forward to visiting the local museum the following Tuesday, a visit that wasn't actually scheduled. Then he waited to see what would happen. It was a simple but effective way to identify if information was being leaked, something he had learned from reading spy novels. Sarah was impressed when she learned about George's improvised security test. The young prince had demonstrated remarkable intuition and maturity in recognizing that something was amiss. His test had indeed revealed that information was being passed along inappropriate channels, confirming their worst fears about the security breach. That evening, Sarah requested a private meeting with Prince George. They met in the library, a room that had been swept for surveillance devices just hours earlier. The conversation would change everything for both of them. "Your Royal Highness," Sarah began carefully, "I need to discuss something important with you. There are certain security concerns that require your cooperation and understanding." George listened intently as Sarah explained the situation in terms appropriate for his age and position. She avoided frightening details but made it clear that his safety required additional precautions and that he needed to be extra vigilant about his surroundings and the people around him. "I want you to know that you can trust me completely," Sarah said, looking directly into George's eyes. "My job is to protect you, and I take that responsibility very seriously. But I also want you to feel that you can come to me if anything seems wrong, or if you notice anything unusual." George appreciated Sarah's honesty and directness. Too often, adults tried to shield him from reality, treating him like a child rather than acknowledging his intelligence and maturity. Sarah's approach made him feel respected and included rather than merely protected. "What do you need me to do?" George asked simply. Sarah was struck by the prince's composure and willingness to cooperate. Many teenagers would have been frightened or rebellious when faced with such restrictions. George's response demonstrated the training and character development he had received throughout his life. "For now, we need you to continue your normal routine but be aware of your surroundings," Sarah explained. "Notice if anyone new appears in your usual spaces or if regular staff members behave differently. Trust your instincts, and don't hesitate to signal me if something feels wrong." They developed a simple communication system using subtle gestures that would allow George to alert Sarah without drawing attention from potential threats. It was a precaution that would prove crucial in the coming days. As their meeting concluded, George felt a new sense of responsibility and partnership with his protection team. He was no longer just a passive subject to be guarded, but an active participant in maintaining his own security. This shift would prove to be the foundation for everything that followed. Sarah left the library that night with mixed feelings. She was encouraged by Prince George's maturity and cooperation, but the weight of responsibility felt heavier than ever. The young prince's trust in her was both an honor and a burden that she was determined to prove worthy of. The castle settled into its evening routine, but for those aware of the underlying tensions, sleep would not come easily. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and difficult decisions that would test everyone involved. The quiet partnership between Prince George and Detective Inspector Manning was about to face its greatest trial. The following morning brought an unexpected twist that would accelerate everything. Prince George was having breakfast in the private dining room when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. His history tutor, Mr. Peterson, was having an intense whispered conversation on his mobile phone near the corridor entrance. George couldn't hear the words, but the man's body language suggested urgency and secrecy. What made George's heart race was seeing Mr. Peterson quickly end the call and pocket his phone the moment he noticed the prince watching. The tutor then approached with his usual cheerful demeanor as if nothing had happened. But George had seen the flash of panic in the man's eyes before the mask slipped back into place. George continued eating his breakfast normally, but his mind was racing. Mr. Peterson had been his history tutor for 2 years and had always seemed trustworthy and dedicated. The idea that someone so close to him might be involved in the security threat was deeply unsettling. George remembered Sarah's words about trusting his instincts, and every instinct was now screaming that something was very wrong. During their morning history lesson, George carefully observed Mr. Peterson's behavior. The tutor seemed more nervous than usual, frequently checking his phone and occasionally losing his train of thought mid-sentence. When George asked a question about the lesson, Mr. Peterson seemed startled, as if his mind had been elsewhere entirely. "Are you feeling all right, Mr. Peterson?" George asked with genuine concern, though he was actually testing his tutor's reaction. "Oh yes. Your Highness, just a bit tired," Mr. Peterson replied quickly, but sweat had appeared on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "Perhaps we should focus on your essay about the tutor period today." George nodded and pretended to concentrate on his work, but he was actually planning how to alert Sarah without raising Mr. Peterson's suspicions. The communication system they had established required Sarah to be within sight, but she was currently positioned outside the classroom for security reasons. The opportunity came when George asked for permission to use the bathroom. As he left the classroom, he caught Sarah's eye and used the subtle hand gesture they had practiced. Sarah's expression didn't change, but George knew she had received the message. When he returned to the classroom, he noticed Sarah had repositioned herself where she could better observe the lesson through the partially open door. What Sarah saw confirmed George's suspicions. Mr. Peterson was indeed behaving strangely, repeatedly glancing toward the windows and checking his phone with increasing frequency. His lesson delivery was distracted and unfocused, completely unlike his usual professional demeanor. Sarah immediately recognized the signs of someone under extreme stress or pressure. After the lesson ended, Sarah discreetly followed Mr. Peterson as he left the castle grounds. Her training in surveillance allowed her to maintain a safe distance while keeping the tutor in sight. What she discovered would prove George's instincts were absolutely correct. Mr. Peterson walked to a small cafe in the nearby village where he met with a man Sarah didn't recognize. From her concealed position across the street, She could see the two men engaged in an intense conversation. The unknown man appeared to be giving Mr. Peterson instructions, occasionally gesturing in the direction of the castle. Sarah used her phone to take discreet photographs of both men and their meeting. The most damning evidence came when Sarah saw money change hands. The unknown man passed an envelope to Mr. Peterson, who accepted it with obvious reluctance. Mr. Peterson's entire demeanor suggested he was being coerced rather than willingly participating in whatever scheme was unfolding. This detail would prove crucial in how Sarah and her team decided to handle the situation. When Mr. Peterson returned to the castle that afternoon for George's second lesson, Sarah was ready. She had already briefed Commander Richards about her observations and received authorization to take action. The plan they developed would require George's continued cooperation and remarkable composure for someone his age. Before the afternoon lesson began, Sarah had a brief conversation with George in the corridor. Speaking quietly, she confirmed that his suspicions about Mr. Peterson were correct and that they had evidence of the tutor's involvement in the security breach. She explained that they needed George to act normally during the lesson while they gathered additional evidence. "I know this must be frightening," Sarah said softly, "but you've shown incredible bravery and intelligence. We need you to continue being brave just a little longer." George nodded, feeling a mixture of pride in Sarah's confidence in him and anxiety about facing Mr. Peterson knowing what he now knew. The idea that someone he had trusted and learned from had been betraying that trust was deeply painful. But George also felt angry that someone would put him and his family at risk for money. The afternoon lesson proceeded with careful normalcy. George asked his usual questions and participated in discussions about medieval English history, while Mr. Peterson attempted to teach, despite his obvious nervousness. Unknown to the tutor, specialized surveillance equipment was recording every word and movement in the classroom. Sarah positioned herself where she could observe both George and Mr. Peterson while also monitoring communications from her team members who were tracking the unknown man from the cafe. The coordination required split-second timing and absolute professionalism from everyone involved. During the lesson, Mr. Peterson received a text message that clearly distressed him. His hands were visibly shaking as he read it, and he struggled to maintain his composure. George noticed the change immediately and glanced toward Sarah, who gave him a barely perceptible nod of acknowledgement. "Mr. Peterson," George said with impressive calm, "perhaps we should continue this lesson tomorrow. You seem unwell today." The tutor looked up with genuine gratitude in his eyes, as if George's kindness was breaking his heart. "Thank you, Your Highness. You're very considerate." As Mr. Peterson gathered his materials to leave, Sarah made a decision that would define everything that followed. Instead of allowing him to walk into what was clearly a dangerous situation for both him and Prince George, she chose to intervene directly. The risk was enormous, but her instincts told her that Mr. Peterson was more victim than villain. "Mr. Peterson," Sarah said as he reached the classroom door, "I think we need to have a conversation." The history tutor stopped as if he had been struck by lightning. His shoulders sagged in defeat, and when he turned around, tears were running down his face. The careful facade he had been maintaining for weeks finally crumbled completely. "I never wanted any of this," he whispered, his voice breaking. "They have my daughter." The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Sarah felt her heart sink as she realized the full scope of what they were dealing with. Mr. Peterson wasn't a willing conspirator, but a desperate father whose child was being used as leverage against Prince George's security. The situation had just become infinitely more complex and dangerous. "Sit down, Mr. Peterson," Sarah said gently, her training kicking in as she assessed this new information. "Tell me everything." George watched as his history tutor collapsed into a chair, his face buried in his hands. Despite everything, the prince felt overwhelming sympathy for the man who had taught him about kings and queens who had faced impossible choices throughout history. Now Mr. Peterson was facing his own impossible choice between his daughter's safety and his duty to the royal family. "Her name is Emma," Mr. Peterson began, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's only 12 years old. They took her 3 weeks ago when she was walking home from school. At first I thought it was a normal kidnapping, and I was prepared to pay whatever ransom they demanded. But then they told me what they really wanted." Sarah listened intently while simultaneously signaling for additional security to secure the classroom. This conversation needed to happen, but it also represented a potential security risk if Mr. Peterson's handlers were monitoring his movements or communications. They knew everything about my work here, Mr. Peterson continued. They knew my schedule, George's schedule, even details about lessons and activities that weren't public knowledge. Someone had been watching us for months, planning this operation carefully. George felt a chill run down his spine. The idea that he had been under surveillance without knowing it was terrifying. But what struck him most was the pain in Mr. Peterson's voice as he spoke about his daughter. George couldn't imagine the agony of having someone you love used as a weapon against you. "What exactly did they ask you to do?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. They wanted detailed information about George's daily routine, his movements around the castle, and advance notice of any planned trips or appearances, Mr. Peterson explained. They also wanted me to plant a small device in the classroom that would allow them to monitor conversations. Sarah's blood ran cold. If there was indeed a surveillance device in the classroom, their current conversation was potentially being monitored by hostile forces. She immediately activated a silent alarm that would bring additional security personnel and technical specialists to sweep the room for electronic devices. "Mr. Peterson, I need you to show me exactly where you placed any devices," Sarah said urgently. "Our safety may depend on it." The history tutor led them to a bookshelf where he had hidden a tiny recording device disguised as a pen. His hands were shaking as he pointed it out, clearly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he had been forced to do. Sarah immediately called for the technical team to disable and remove the device safely. George watched this unfold with a mixture of fascination and horror. The spy novels he enjoyed reading had never conveyed the real human cost of espionage and betrayal. Seeing Mr. Peterson's anguish made the danger feel intensely personal rather than abstract. "They call me every day to check that I'm following their instructions," Mr. Peterson explained. "If I miss a call or if they suspect I've told anyone, they've threatened to." He couldn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood the implication. Sarah made a quick decision that would require approval from the highest levels of government. "Mr. Peterson, we're going to help you get your daughter back. But I need you to continue following their instructions for a little while longer while we develop a plan to rescue Emma and neutralize this threat." The relief in Mr. Peterson's eyes was immediate and overwhelming. For weeks he had carried this burden alone, terrified that any mistake would cost his daughter her life. Having professional help offered a glimmer of hope he hadn't dared to feel. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, echoing the same words George had spoken the day before. Sarah explained that Mr. Peterson would need to continue his normal routine while working with intelligence services. To trace the communications from his handlers, every phone call and message would be monitored and analyzed to build a picture of the criminal organization behind the plot. George listened to these plans with growing admiration for Sarah's professionalism and compassion. She had transformed a dangerous security breach into an opportunity to save an innocent child while protecting the royal family. The prince was beginning to understand that real courage often meant making difficult decisions under pressure. "Your Highness," Sarah said, turning to George, "we'll need to adjust your schedule and security arrangements while we work on this operation. Are you prepared to help us?" "Of course," George replied without hesitation. "But I want to help rescue Emma too. She's in danger because of me." Sarah was moved by the prince's sense of responsibility and desire to help others, even at potential risk to himself. "Your willingness to help is exactly what we need. The best way you can help Emma is by following our security protocols and trusting us to handle the operational details." Over the next several hours, a complex operation began to take shape. Intelligence specialists worked to trace the criminal network, while negotiation experts developed strategies for securing Emma's release. Technical teams swept the entire castle for additional surveillance devices, finding 2 more hidden cameras that had been monitoring the prince's movements. Meanwhile, George continued his normal routine with enhanced but discreet security measures. He attended his afternoon riding lesson, had dinner with his family, and completed his homework assignments. To any external observer, nothing had changed. But George was now an active participant in his own protection rather than a passive subject. Mr. Peterson received his daily check-in call that evening while surrounded by intelligence officers monitoring every word. He managed to maintain his usual nervous but compliant tone, while providing the requested information about George's activities. The call was traced to a location in London, giving the authorities their first solid lead on the criminal organization. Sarah spent that night coordinating with multiple law enforcement agencies and intelligence services. The case had grown beyond a simple royal protection matter into a complex international investigation involving kidnapping, extortion, and potential terrorism. The stakes couldn't have been higher. As George prepared for bed that night, he reflected on how much his life had changed in just 2 days. He had discovered betrayal and conspiracy, but also courage and compassion. Mr. Peterson's situation had taught him that people were often more complicated than they appeared, and that sometimes good people were forced to do bad things by circumstances beyond their control. The prince also felt a new appreciation for the dedicated professionals who worked tirelessly to keep him and his family safe. Sarah and her team were risking their own lives to protect him, and they were now extending that protection to include Emma Peterson, a girl they had never met but who needed their help. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the operation to rescue Emma began in earnest. George fell asleep knowing that his actions and decisions would play a crucial role in determining whether an innocent child would be reunited with her father or remain a prisoner of those who sought to harm the royal family. The rescue operation began before dawn, with Prince George playing a more active role than anyone had initially planned. Sarah had spent the night working with intelligence analysts to develop a strategy that would save Emma Peterson while exposing the full extent of the criminal network. The plan was risky and would require precise timing and flawless execution. George was awakened early and briefed on his part in the operation. The criminals expected Mr. Peterson to provide information about a special event that was supposedly planned for that afternoon. Instead of canceling or avoiding the fake event, the security team had decided to use it as bait to draw the criminals into a trap. "Your Royal Highness," Commander Richards explained during the morning briefing, "we need you to appear to participate in this fabricated event while actually being safely secured elsewhere. The criminals will be watching for you to appear at the announced location, giving our teams the opportunity to identify and apprehend them." George understood the strategy, but was concerned about the risks to everyone involved. What about Emma? How do we know they won't hurt her when they realize it's a trap? Sarah had been thinking about the same concern all night. "We have teams positioned near the location where we believe Emma is being held. The moment we move against the surveillance teams, we'll simultaneously execute the rescue operation. It all has to happen at exactly the same time." The complexity of coordinating multiple operations across London while maintaining the appearance of normal royal activities required resources from several government agencies. George was impressed by the level of expertise and dedication being applied to solve a problem that had started with his simple observation of his tutor's suspicious behavior. Mr. Peterson arrived for the morning lesson looking more exhausted than ever. The strain of maintaining his double life while knowing his daughter's life hung in the balance was clearly taking a severe toll. George felt enormous sympathy for the man, recognizing that he was showing incredible courage in cooperating with the rescue operation despite the obvious risks. "How are you holding up, Mr. Peterson?" George asked with genuine concern as they began what would be their final lesson together. "I keep thinking about Emma," the tutor replied honestly. "She must be so frightened. She doesn't understand why this is happening to her." George had been thinking about Emma too. She was only 3 years younger than him, probably worried about missing school and wondering why her father hadn't come to rescue her yet. The thought of a child being used as a pawn in an adult conflict made George angry in a way he had never experienced before. Sarah watched the interaction between George and Mr. Peterson with growing respect for both of them. The prince was showing remarkable maturity and compassion, while the tutor was demonstrating incredible bravery in continuing to cooperate despite his terror for his daughter's safety. Both were behaving with more courage than many adults she had worked with in similar situations. At precisely 11 o'clock, Mr. Peterson received the expected phone call from his handlers. Following the script that had been carefully prepared, he informed them that Prince George would be visiting a local art gallery that afternoon for a private viewing of a new exhibition. The criminals took the bait immediately, asking for specific details about timing, security arrangements, and the prince's planned route. Unknown to the criminals, every word of their conversation was being recorded and analyzed. Intelligence specialists were tracing the call, while behavioral experts studied the voices and language patterns to build profiles of the individuals involved. The information gathered would be crucial for the simultaneous operations planned for that afternoon. George spent the morning maintaining his normal routine, while teams of specialists prepared for the operation. He attended a French lesson, participated in a photography session for an upcoming official portrait, and had lunch with his parents. To anyone observing, it appeared to be a typical day in the life of the young prince. But beneath the surface, George was intensely focused on his role in the afternoon's events. He had been briefed on exactly what he needed to do and when. The timing would be crucial, and any deviation from the plan could endanger Emma's life or compromise the entire operation. At 2 o'clock, a convoy of vehicles left Windsor Castle heading toward London. To external observers, it appeared that Prince George was traveling to the art gallery, as Mr. Peterson had reported. In reality, George was safely secured in a different location while a carefully selected decoy traveled in his place. The deception was elaborate and professionally executed. Sarah accompanied the real Prince George to a secure facility where they could monitor the operation in real time. George watched multiple screens showing different aspects of the operation, feeling both fascination and anxiety as events unfolded. He could see the decoy convoy approaching the gallery, while other screens showed tactical teams positioning themselves around the suspected location where Emma was being held. The criminals had taken the bait completely. Surveillance teams observed multiple individuals conducting reconnaissance around the art gallery, clearly preparing for some kind of operation targeting the prince's visit. The moment these individuals were identified and tracked, the rescue operation for Emma would begin. There, Sarah pointed to one of the screens showing the gallery area. Those 3 men near the coffee shop have been watching the building for the past hour, and that woman with the shopping bags has made 4 passes by the main entrance. George watched with intense focus as the security teams identified and began tracking each suspected criminal. The level of coordination required was extraordinary, with teams communicating through encrypted channels while maintaining the appearance of normal street activity in central London. At exactly 3:15, Commander Richards gave the order to proceed. Simultaneously, tactical teams moved to apprehend the surveillance teams around the gallery, while another unit stormed the warehouse where intelligence analysis suggested Emma was being held. George held his breath as he watched the operations unfold on multiple screens. The rescue team found Emma exactly where the intelligence had predicted. She was frightened but unharmed, clearly relieved to see police officers arriving to help her. George felt overwhelming relief and happiness as he watched the 12-year-old girl being safely evacuated from the warehouse where she had been held for nearly a month. "She's safe," Sarah announced, and George could hear the emotion in her voice despite her professional training. Emma Peterson is safe and will be reunited with her father within the hour. At the art gallery, the operation was equally successful. 6 individuals were apprehended while attempting to conduct surveillance of the prince's supposed visit. When they realized the convoy contained a decoy rather than the real Prince George, their shock and confusion confirmed that the operation had achieved its objectives completely. George watched as Mr. Peterson was brought to the secure facility where Emma was being treated by medical personnel. The reunion between father and daughter was emotional and deeply moving. George felt tears in his own eyes as he saw the relief and joy on both their faces after weeks of fear and separation. "Thank you," Mr. Peterson said to George when they were finally able to speak. "I know I betrayed your trust, but you saved my daughter's life by being brave enough to notice something was wrong and alert Detective Inspector Manning." George shook the man's hand formally, but his words were heartfelt. "I'm just glad Emma is safe. You were trying to protect your daughter, and I understand why you did what you felt you had to do." The successful operation had eliminated the immediate threat to Prince George's safety while rescuing an innocent child from criminals who had used her as a weapon. But Sarah knew that the investigation was far from over. The individuals they had arrested were likely part of a larger organization, and there would be extensive work required to understand the full scope of the threat and prevent future incidents. The investigation that followed revealed the true scope of the criminal organization that had targeted Prince George. Over the next several days, as interrogations proceeded and evidence was analyzed, a disturbing picture emerged of a sophisticated network with international connections and resources far beyond what anyone had initially suspected. Sarah found herself at the center of briefings with intelligence chiefs and government ministers as the full implications became clear. The group that had kidnapped Emma Peterson was part of a larger organization that had been planning multiple operations against the royal family and other high-profile targets across Europe. Prince George had been their primary objective, but he was not their only target. George continued his regular activities while receiving daily updates on the investigation's progress. The experience had changed him in ways that were both subtle and profound. He found himself more observant of his surroundings and more appreciative of the people who worked to keep him safe. But he also felt a new sense of responsibility about his role and the potential consequences of his position for others. The people we arrested have been linked to at least 6 other planned operations, Sarah explained during one of their regular security briefings. Your alertness and quick thinking didn't just save Emma Peterson's life, it may have prevented several other serious incidents. The prince absorbed this information with typical seriousness, but Sarah could see the weight of responsibility it placed on his young shoulders. She was concerned about the psychological impact of learning that his very existence made him a target for dangerous people with political motivations he was still too young to fully understand. Mr. Peterson had been completely cleared of any wrongdoing once the full circumstances of his coercion became known. However, he had made the difficult decision to resign from his position as the prince's tutor and relocate with Emma to a different part of the country. The trauma of their experience required time and distance to heal properly. I understand why he needs to leave, George told Sarah during one of their conversations, but I'm going to miss him. He was a good teacher, and what happened wasn't really his fault. Sarah was continually impressed by George's mature perspective on the complex situation. Many adults would have felt anger or resentment toward Mr. Peterson for his role in the security breach. Even understanding his circumstances, George's ability to separate the man's desperate actions from his character and intentions showed remarkable emotional intelligence. The investigation had also revealed uncomfortable truths about security, vulnerabilities that went beyond the immediate threat. The criminal organization had demonstrated sophisticated knowledge of royal protection procedures and had been gathering intelligence about the family's activities for much longer than anyone had realized. Significant changes to security protocols would be necessary. Commander Richards called a comprehensive review of all security arrangements, something that would affect not just Prince George but his entire family. New procedures would be implemented, additional personnel would be assigned, and some traditional royal activities would need to be modified or eliminated entirely. The balance between security and normalcy would shift significantly. George participated in these security reviews with the same seriousness he brought to his academic studies. He asked thoughtful questions about the new procedures and offered insights based on his recent experiences. His perspective as the target of the threat provided valuable input that helped shape more effective protection strategies. Your Highness, Commander Richards said during one planning session, your observations and instincts have proven invaluable throughout this incident. We would like to formalize your role in your own security by providing you with additional training in threat recognition and response procedures. The proposal excited George, who had always been interested in the practical aspects of security and protection, but it also represented a significant shift from treating him as someone to be protected toward recognizing him as a participant in his own safety. The training would be age-appropriate but comprehensive, covering everything from surveillance detection to emergency communication procedures. Sarah volunteered to oversee George's security training personally. Their partnership during the recent crisis had demonstrated exceptional mutual trust and effectiveness. She had the expertise to provide the training he needed while maintaining the respectful but approachable relationship that allowed him to communicate openly about potential threats. The first training session took place in a secure facility, designed to simulate various scenarios George might encounter. He learned to identify suspicious behavior, recognize potential surveillance, and use discreet communication methods to alert his protection team. The training was intensive but fascinating, combining practical skills with psychological insights about criminal behavior. The key is to trust your instincts while remaining calm and rational, Sarah explained as they practiced recognition exercises. You demonstrated perfect instincts with Mr. Peterson's situation. Now we're giving you the tools to act on those instincts more effectively. George excelled at the training, showing natural aptitude for observation and analysis. But Sarah was careful to balance the security education with reminders that he was still a teenager, who deserved to enjoy normal activities and relationships. The goal was to make him safer and more aware, not to make him paranoid or isolated. Meanwhile, the international investigation continued to reveal new connections and potential threats. Intelligence services across Europe were sharing information about related organizations and planned operations. The network that had targeted Prince George was part of a larger extremist movement, with political objectives that extended far beyond the British royal family. Emma Peterson was recovering well from her ordeal, receiving counseling and support to help her process the traumatic experience. George had asked to send her a personal message expressing his relief at her safety and his admiration for her courage during the frightening weeks of captivity. The gesture meant a great deal to both Emma and her father. She wants to thank you personally, Mr. Peterson told George during a final meeting before they relocated. Emma says she knew someone important must be trying to help her because the people who took her seemed so worried about getting caught. The comment touched George deeply, reinforcing his understanding that his position carried real responsibility for other people's safety and well-being. He was beginning to comprehend that being a future king meant more than ceremonies and privileges. It meant that his choices and actions could have profound consequences for others. As the immediate crisis resolved and new security procedures became routine, George found himself changed by the experience in ways he was still discovering. He felt more mature and confident, but also more aware of the serious realities that came with his position. The partnership he had developed with Sarah had given him a model for how he could work effectively with the professionals dedicated to protecting him and his family. Sarah, too, was affected by their collaboration. Working with Prince George had reminded her why she had chosen a career in protection services, not just to prevent harm, but to preserve the possibility for good people to live freely and safely. The young prince's courage and compassion had reinforced her commitment to her duties while teaching her that effective protection required partnership rather than just vigilance. The successful resolution of the crisis had created new protocols and new relationships that would shape how the royal family approached security for years to come. But it had also demonstrated that even in an age of sophisticated threats, the most important security tool remained human intuition and the courage to act on observations that something was wrong. 3 months after the crisis, life had settled into a new normal at Windsor Castle. The enhanced security measures had become routine, and George had completed his specialized training with exceptional results. But the most significant change was in the relationship between the prince and his protection team, particularly with Detective Inspector Sarah Manning. George had requested that Sarah remain as his primary protection officer, and his parents had agreed after seeing how effectively they worked together. Their partnership had evolved beyond the traditional guard and protected dynamic into something more collaborative and respectful. Sarah treated George as an intelligent partner in his own security, rather than simply someone to be watched and protected. The arrangement was unusual within royal protection services, but the success of their collaboration during the crisis had convinced senior officials that this new approach offered advantages worth exploring. George's enhanced awareness and training meant he could contribute actively to identifying potential threats, rather than remaining a passive subject of protection. Your observation skills have improved remarkably, Sarah noted during one of their regular security briefings. You're noticing details and patterns that even trained officers sometimes miss. George had indeed become exceptionally skilled at reading situations and people. The training had sharpened natural instincts that had been demonstrated during the Mr. Peterson incident. He could spot surveillance, recognize unusual behavior, and assess potential threats with growing confidence and accuracy. But success had also brought new pressures and responsibilities that weighed heavily on the young prince. He was increasingly aware that his safety wasn't just about him. It affected his family, his protection team, and innocent people like Emma Peterson, who could become caught up in threats directed at the royal family. This awareness made every decision feel more consequential. During a routine visit to a youth center in London, George noticed something that immediately concerned him. A maintenance worker who was supposed to be repairing lighting fixtures was actually positioning himself to observe and potentially photograph the areas where George would be interacting with the young people. The man's behavior was subtle, but George's trained eye caught the discrepancies. Using the discreet communication methods he had learned, George alerted Sarah to his observations. She was able to verify his suspicions and arrange for the suspicious individual to be quietly detained and questioned. The incident turned out to be relatively minor. A freelance photographer, hoping to get unauthorized pictures for tabloid newspapers, but it demonstrated how George's enhanced awareness was contributing to his own protection. "Excellent work," Sarah told him afterward. "Your alertness prevented what could have been a security breach and protected the privacy of the other young people at the center." George felt satisfaction in successfully applying his training, but he was also troubled by the realization that he would need to maintain this level of vigilance for the rest of his life. The weight of constant awareness was beginning to affect how he experienced normal activities and relationships. Sarah recognized the psychological burden that George was carrying and arranged for him to receive counseling support from specialists who understood the unique pressures of royal life. The goal was to help him develop healthy coping strategies while maintaining the security awareness that kept him safe. "It's important to remember that you're still a teenager," the counselor explained during one of their sessions. "Your experiences have been extraordinary, but you still need time to develop and grow like any young person your age." The counseling helped George understand that his enhanced security awareness didn't need to consume his entire identity. He could be vigilant when necessary while still enjoying the activities and relationships that made his life meaningful. Finding this balance would be an ongoing challenge, but it was essential for his long-term well-being. Meanwhile, the international investigation that had begun with the Peterson case continued to yield results. Intelligence services had identified and disrupted several other planned operations targeting various European royal families and government officials. The network that had threatened Prince George was part of a larger extremist movement that had been planning coordinated attacks across multiple countries. George received regular briefings about the investigation's progress, partly for security reasons, but also because his experiences had given him valuable insights into how such organizations operated. His perspective as someone who had been targeted helped analysts understand the criminals' methods and motivations more clearly. "The information you provided about how they approached Mr. Peterson has helped us identify similar patterns in other cases," Commander Richards explained during one briefing. "Your observations are contributing to investigations that extend far beyond your own security." This knowledge gave George a sense that his difficult experiences had served a larger purpose. While he wouldn't have chosen to go through the crisis, knowing that it had helped protect others made the trauma feel more meaningful. He was beginning to understand how personal challenges could be transformed into opportunities to serve and protect others. Sarah had also been affected by their shared experiences in ways that were becoming clearer over time. Working with Prince George had changed her perspective on royal protection and her own career goals. She had always been dedicated to her duties, but the partnership with George had shown her new possibilities for how protection services could evolve. The success of their collaborative approach had attracted attention from other protection agencies and royal families across Europe. Sarah was invited to speak at international conferences about innovative security partnerships and was being considered for promotion to senior leadership positions within the Royal Protection Services, but Sarah found herself reluctant to accept assignments that would take her away from her work with Prince George. Their partnership had become personally meaningful to her, and she believed it was beneficial for his development and security. The decision about her career advancement would require careful consideration of multiple factors. "I want you to pursue whatever opportunities are best for your career," George told her when she mentioned the potential promotions. "You've already taught me so much about protecting myself and others. I'll be able to work effectively with whoever replaces you." Sarah was touched by George's maturity and concern for her professional development, but she was also aware that their working relationship had become uniquely effective. and that replacing her might disrupt the progress they had made in developing new security protocols. The decision would require input from senior officials and careful consideration of long-term implications. As autumn approached, George was preparing for increased public responsibilities as he grew older. His experiences during the crisis had accelerated his understanding of the serious aspects of royal duty, and his parents had decided he was ready for more substantial public engagements. The security training and enhanced awareness would be crucial assets as his profile and responsibilities increased. The relationship between George and Sarah had demonstrated that effective protection could enhance rather than restrict a royal's ability to engage with the public. Their partnership model was being studied and potentially adapted for other members of the royal family and other protective services around the world. Looking back on the events that had begun with his simple observation of Mr. Peterson's suspicious behavior, George could see how much he had grown and learned. The crisis had been frightening and challenging, but it had also revealed strengths and capabilities he hadn't known he possessed. More importantly, it had taught him that his position carried real responsibilities for the safety and well-being of others. The decision that would change everything came on a crisp December morning, exactly 6 months after the Peterson crisis had first unfolded. Sarah Manning sat in Commander Richard's office, staring at the official documents that would determine the next phase of her career and her relationship with Prince George. The promotion to Director of International Royal Protection Services is a remarkable opportunity, Commander Richards said carefully. You would be overseeing security for multiple royal families across Europe and helping to develop new protocols based on your successful innovations here. Sarah understood the significance of what was being offered. The position would make her one of the most senior protection officials in the world, with responsibility for implementing the collaborative security approaches she had pioneered with Prince George. It was the kind of career advancement she had always dreamed of achieving, but accepting the promotion would mean leaving her current assignment and ending the partnership that had become so important to both her and the prince. The working relationship they had developed was unprecedented in royal protection services, and Sarah wasn't certain it could be successfully replicated with someone else. "What does Prince George think about this?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Commander Richard smiled slightly. "His Royal Highness has specifically requested a meeting with senior officials to discuss your future assignment. He's prepared a formal presentation arguing that you should remain in your current position." Sarah felt a mixture of pride and concern about George's intervention on her behalf. She was touched by his loyalty and support, but she was also worried that his attachment to their working relationship might be limiting his ability to adapt to working with other protection officers. Part of her job was to prepare him for independence, not create dependence on any individual officer. The meeting with Prince George and senior officials took place that afternoon in the formal conference room at Windsor Castle. George had prepared extensively, creating a detailed presentation that analyzed the security improvements achieved through their partnership and argued for its continuation. His approach was professional and data-driven, focusing on objective benefits rather than personal preferences. Detective Inspector Manning and I have developed communication and threat assessment protocols that have proven exceptionally effective, George explained, using charts and statistics to support his arguments. The collaborative approach we've implemented has enhanced my security while also improving my ability to contribute positively to public engagements. Sarah watched with amazement as the 15-year-old prince presented his case with the skill and sophistication of an experienced executive. His analysis was thorough and compelling, demonstrating not just his intelligence but his deep understanding of the complex factors that influence royal protection services. Furthermore, George continued, the training and experience I've gained through this partnership have prepared me to work effectively with other protection officers when necessary. This isn't about dependence on any individual, but about maintaining a proven system that benefits everyone involved. The officials were clearly impressed by George's presentation, but Sarah could see they were also concerned about the precedent of allowing a royal family member to influence staffing decisions. The balance between respecting George's input and maintaining proper organizational authority was delicate and complex. After George finished his presentation, Commander Richards asked Sarah to share her own perspective on the situation. She had been thinking about this moment for weeks, weighing her personal desires against her professional responsibilities and George's long-term interests. I believe Prince George has developed the skills and awareness necessary to work effectively with any qualified protection officer, Sarah began. Our partnership has been successful because it was based on mutual respect and clear communication, qualities that can be maintained regardless of personnel changes. George looked surprised and slightly hurt by Sarah's apparent willingness to accept reassignment. But Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the emotional difficulty of what she was saying. However, I also believe that the collaborative approach we've developed represents the future of Royal Protection Services. If my accepting the promotion to Director of International Royal Protection Services allows me to implement these methods more broadly, then that may serve the greater good even if it means ending our current partnership. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications of Sarah's statement. She was essentially arguing that their successful partnership had become too important to remain limited to just one assignment. The methods they had developed needed to be shared and implemented more widely. Prince George stared at Sarah for a long moment, and she could see him processing her reasoning. Slowly, his expression changed from disappointment to understanding. He was beginning to realize that their work together had significance beyond their personal relationship. Detective Inspector Manning is right, George said finally, his voice steady despite his obvious emotion. If our partnership has proven that these methods work, then other people deserve the same level of protection and collaboration. My security is important, but it shouldn't be more important than everyone else's. Sarah felt overwhelming pride in George's mature response. Even in disappointment, he was thinking about the broader implications and the welfare of others. It was exactly the kind of leadership and selflessness that would serve him well as a future king. Commander Richards nodded approvingly. Your Highness, that perspective demonstrates exceptional wisdom and consideration for others. Detective Inspector Manning, your work here has indeed proven that collaborative protection methods can be highly effective. The question is how to implement these approaches more broadly while ensuring continuity of your current assignment. What followed was a discussion that would reshape how Royal Protection Services operated across Europe. The officials developed a plan that would allow Sarah to accept the promotion while gradually transitioning her current responsibilities to a new partner for Prince George. She would spend 6 months training her replacement and implementing the collaborative methods in other assignments before fully transitioning to her new role. The solution satisfied everyone's objectives while acknowledging the legitimate concerns about maintaining effective security for Prince George. Sarah would be able to advance her career and spread the innovative methods they had developed, while George would have time to adjust to working with a new protection officer using the same collaborative approach. I want to be involved in selecting and training my new protection officer, George said, demonstrating the confidence and assertiveness he had developed through his experiences. I understand the methods now and I can help ensure they're implemented correctly. Sarah agreed enthusiastically. George's involvement in the transition would help ensure continuity, while also giving him valuable experience in leadership and collaboration. It was another example of how their partnership had evolved beyond traditional protection relationships. Over the following months, Sarah worked with Prince George to train Detective Inspector Michael Chen, a highly qualified officer who had been selected for his open-mindedness and collaborative approach. The transition was gradual and carefully managed, allowing all three to develop working relationships while maintaining security effectiveness. George adapted to working with Michael more easily than anyone had expected, demonstrating that the confidence and skills he had developed with Sarah were transferable. The collaborative methods proved to be sustainable beyond the specific personalities who had created them. On Sarah's last day as Prince George's primary protection officer, they met privately in the library where they had first discussed the Peterson crisis almost a year earlier. Both had been changed profoundly by their shared experiences and the partnership they had built. You taught me that effective protection is about partnership, not just vigilance, George said as they reflected on their time working together. But more importantly, you showed me that my position can be used to help and protect others, not just to be helped and protected. Sarah felt tears in her eyes as she realized how much the serious, thoughtful young man before her had grown since their first meeting. You taught me that innovation and collaboration can make everyone safer. Your courage and intelligence made our partnership possible." As Sarah departed Windsor Castle for the last time as Prince George's protection officer, she carried with her the knowledge that their work together would continue to influence royal protection services for years to come. The methods they had developed were already being implemented across Europe, making royal families and their protection teams safer and more effective. Prince George continued his development under Michael Chen's protection, applying the lessons he had learned and contributing to further innovations in collaborative security. The experience with Sarah had given him confidence and skills that would serve him well throughout his life. As a public figure and future king, the discreet but powerful choice that Prince George had made to trust Sarah and work collaboratively with her had led to Sarah's promotion and the transformation